The stagecoach arrived 3 hours late, and Calvin Fletcher stood on the dusty main street of Bannack, Montana Territory, wondering if he had made the worst mistake of his 32 years when he placed that advertisement for a housekeeper in the Helena newspaper. The wind kicked up dirt devils around his worn boots as he watched the coach pull to a stop outside the general store, his weathered hands stuffed deep in his pockets. He had expected a sturdy middle-aged woman, perhaps a widow looking for respectable work. What emerged from that coach instead was a young woman in a faded calico dress, her dark auburn hair escaping from beneath a simple bonnet, and behind her came 3 children ranging in age from what looked like maybe 5 to perhaps 10 years old. Calvin felt his stomach drop as he watched the woman look around with wide, uncertain eyes the color of summer sage. She held the hand of the smallest child, a little girl with blonde braids who clutched a rag doll. Behind them, a boy of maybe 7 or 8 struggled with a single worn carpetbag, and an older girl with the same auburn hair as the woman carried a smaller satchel. The stagecoach driver handed down one more bag and tipped his hat before climbing back up to his seat. The woman's gaze landed on Calvin, the only person standing in the street watching the coach's arrival, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, perhaps, or hope, or maybe just desperation. She walked toward him with careful, measured steps, her spine straight despite the obvious exhaustion in her features. "Mr. Fletcher." Her voice carried a slight tremor, but she met his eyes directly. "I am Rebecca Winters. We corresponded about the housekeeping position." Calvin removed his hat, his mind racing. The advertisement had said room and board for one person. One. He had a modest ranch house 5 miles outside of town, 3 bedrooms counting the small one he used for storage, and he had been alone there for the better part of 3 years since his father passed. The last thing he needed was a household full of children turning his quiet existence upside down. But looking at Rebecca Winters, seeing the way her jaw was set with determination, even as her fingers trembled against the little girl's shoulder, seeing the threadbare quality of all their clothes and the single carpetbag that apparently held all their worldly possessions, Calvin found he could not say the words that would send them away. "Madam," he said carefully, his voice rough from days of speaking to no one but his horses and cattle, "your letter did not mention children." Rebecca's face went pale, and he saw her swallow hard. The oldest girl, maybe 10 years old, moved closer to her mother's side. The boy shifted from foot to foot, his eyes downcast. "No, sir, it did not," Rebecca said, and her voice was steadier now, though Calvin could hear the effort it took. "I apologize for the deception, but I promise you the children will be no trouble. They are well behaved, and they can help with chores. Emma here," she touched the oldest girl's shoulder, "is excellent with mending and cooking. Thomas can tend animals and do any manner of farm work, and little Sarah is learning her letters and will stay out from underfoot." Calvin looked at the 3 young faces staring up at him. Emma had her mother's green eyes, serious and measuring. Thomas kept his gaze down but held himself with a quiet dignity that struck Calvin as uncommon in a boy his age. Little Sarah peeked at him from behind her mother's skirts, clutching that rag doll tighter. "Where is their father?" Calvin asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Dead, sir." Rebecca's voice was flat, final. "Consumption took him 6 months ago in Denver. We had a small boarding house there, but when he passed, the bank took it for debts I did not know he had accumulated. I saw your advertisement and thought perhaps a fresh start would be best for all of us." The September sun beat down on the dusty street, and Calvin was aware that several townspeople had paused in their daily routines to watch this exchange. Mrs. Henderson stood in the doorway of her dress shop, her arms crossed. Old Pete sat on the bench outside the saloon, openly staring. In a town the size of Bannack, this would be the talk of the evening meal at every table. Calvin made his decision, though he suspected it might be a foolish one. The position pays $20 a month plus room and board. I assume that board will now need to stretch to feed 4 instead of 1. Rebecca's eyes widened, and he saw hope flare in them before she quickly tamped it down, as though afraid to trust good fortune. Yes, sir. But I assure you I am a hard worker. You will get your money's worth from me, and the children will earn their keep. We will not be a burden to you. My ranch is 5 miles out. The work is considerable. The house has not had a woman's touch since my mother passed 7 years ago, and I have let things go since my father died. There is cooking, cleaning, washing, mending, and during harvest time, preserving and canning. I keep a small garden, but it needs tending. I have 30 head of cattle, 6 horses, chickens, and 2 milk cows. It is a working ranch, and I need someone who is not afraid of hard work. I am not afraid of work, Mr. Fletcher. Rebecca stood taller, her chin lifting. I have worked since I was 12 years old. I can cook, clean, sew, preserve food, tend a garden, milk cows, and manage a household. My children know the value of honest labor. We will not disappoint you. Calvin nodded slowly, settling his hat back on his head. My wagon is at the livery. Wait here while I fetch it. He turned and walked down the street, feeling the weight of curious eyes following him. At the livery, Sam Cooper gave him a knowing look as Calvin hitched his 2 horses to the wagon. Heard you hired yourself a housekeeper, Sam said, leaning against the stable door with his arms crossed. News travels fast, Calvin replied, checking the harness straps. 4 of them came on that stage. That is going to be quite the change from living alone, Cal. Seems so. Calvin climbed up onto the wagon seat, gathering the reins. She pretty? Sam asked with a grin. Calvin shot him a warning look. She is an employee, Sam, nothing more. But as he drove the wagon back down the main street to where Rebecca and her children waited with their meager belongings, Calvin could not help but notice that yes, Rebecca Winters was indeed pretty, though it was clear life had not been easy on her. There were shadows under those green eyes, and her hands showed the evidence of hard work and hardship. But there was something in the set of her shoulders, the way she immediately began helping the children into the wagon bed, the gentle way she spoke to them, that made Calvin think perhaps this arrangement might work out after all. The ride out to the ranch was mostly silent. Rebecca sat on the wagon seat beside Calvin, her hands folded in her lap, while the 3 children huddled together in the back among the bags. Little Sarah fell asleep against her brother's shoulder within the first mile. How old are they? Calvin asked finally, more to break the silence than from burning curiosity. Emma is 10, Thomas is 8, and Sarah is 5, Rebecca replied. She glanced back at them with such tenderness that Calvin felt something twist in his chest. They have been through much these past months. I want you to know, Mr. Fletcher, that I understand this is not what you bargained for. If at any time you find the arrangement unsuitable, I will seek other employment. I only ask that you give us a fair chance to prove our worth. A deal is a deal, Miss Winters. I am a man of my word. Mrs. Winters, she corrected softly. Though I am widowed, I was married. Mrs. Winters, then. Calvin paused, then added, You may call me Calvin. Mr. Fletcher was my father. He caught the hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. Then you may call me Rebecca. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low hill, and Calvin tried to see it through fresh eyes. It was a solid structure built by his father 20 years ago, log construction with a stone chimney. The barn stood behind it, and there were fenced pastures stretching out toward the mountains in the distance. The house needed a coat of whitewash, and the porch had a loose board he kept meaning to fix. The vegetable garden behind the house was overgrown with weeds, though a few hardy pumpkins had somehow thrived despite his neglect. He heard Rebecca draw in a breath and tensed, waiting for disappointment or criticism. "It is beautiful," she said quietly, and she sounded like she meant it. "You can see the mountains from here." Calvin relaxed slightly. "The Beaverhead Range, good land here, cold winters, but the soil is decent." He pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. The children climbed down, Sarah rubbing her eyes sleepily. Calvin took the bags while Rebecca helped the youngest down. The inside of the house was as neglected as he had warned. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large fireplace dominating one wall. A rough-hewn table and chairs stood near the kitchen area. Dust covered every surface, and dishes from his breakfast were still sitting unwashed in the basin. 3 doors led off the main room. "That is my room," Calvin said, gesturing to the door on the left. "The one on the right was my parents' room. It has a double bed. The back room is small, but it has a single bed and a cot. I have been using it for storage, but I can clear it out." Rebecca surveyed the space with a practiced eye, and Calvin saw her cataloging the work that needed doing. But she did not flinch or complain. Instead, she simply nodded. "Emma and Sarah can share the double bed. Thomas can take the single bed in the back room. That will work well." "And you?" Calvin asked before thinking better of it. "I will make do. Perhaps a bedroll near the fire for now. Once I have my first month's wages, I can purchase what I need to make a proper sleeping arrangement." "There is a settee in the barn," Calvin said gruffly. "My mother had it before she got too sick to sit up much. I can bring it in. It is long enough to sleep on." "That would be kind, thank you." The children stood quietly, taking in their new home. Emma held Sarah's hand, and Thomas stayed close to his mother. They all had that watchful quality of children who had learned not to make trouble, not to ask for too much, not to expect kindness. "Are you hungry?" Calvin asked, addressing the children directly for the first time. "I have bread and some cold beef, some cheese too." Thomas's eyes lit up and Sarah nodded eagerly, but they both looked to their mother before speaking. "What do you say?" Rebecca prompted gently. "Yes, please, sir," Emma said politely. "We would be grateful." "Thank you, sir," Thomas added, and Sarah echoed him in her small voice. Calvin pulled the food from the cupboard, and Rebecca immediately moved to help, finding plates without asking where they were kept, wiping them clean with her apron before serving the children. She cut the bread into even portions, divided the beef fairly, and made sure each child had an equal share before taking a small piece for herself. "There is more," Calvin said, noticing how little she took. "This is plenty, thank you." But he cut another thick slice of bread and added it to her plate anyway, and after a moment's hesitation, she accepted it with quiet grace. The children ate with careful manners, and Calvin found himself watching them. Emma helped Sarah cut her meat. Thomas chewed slowly, making each bite last. These were children who knew what it meant to be hungry, who had learned to appreciate every meal. After they ate, Rebecca rolled up her sleeves. "If you can show me where you keep your linens, I will make up the beds for the children." "Then I would like to start on the dishes and tidying up if that is acceptable." "You just arrived," Calvin protested. "Surely it can wait until morning." Rebecca met his eyes steadily. "I would prefer to start as I mean to continue, sir. The children need clean beds to sleep in tonight, and I will rest better knowing the kitchen is in order." Calvin showed her to the small storage closet where clean sheets were kept, then excused himself to tend to the evening chores. The animals needed feeding, and he welcomed the familiar routine, the chance to think about what he had gotten himself into in the barn. As he forked hay into the stalls, he heard the children's voices drifting from the house. They were helping their mother, their tones cheerful now that they were behind closed doors. He heard Rebecca singing softly, some tune he did not recognize, and Sarah's laugh in response. The house had been silent for so long. Calvin had grown accustomed to the quiet, the solitude. He spoke to the animals more than to people, went days sometimes without hearing another human voice. He had told himself he preferred it that way, that he did not need company, did not need the complication of other people in his life. But hearing that laughter, that song, the sounds of life and warmth and human connection, something in Calvin's chest ached in a way he had not expected. He finished his chores and returned to find the main room transformed. The floor had been swept, the dishes washed and put away, the table scrubbed clean. The children's beds were made up, and he could see through the open doors that they looked inviting and comfortable. The settee from the barn was now positioned near the fireplace, made up with blankets and a pillow. Rebecca stood at the stove stirring something in a pot. The smell of coffee filled the air. "I found your coffee," she said without turning around. "I hope you do not mind. I made enough for both of us. The children are washing up before bed." Calvin hung his hat on the peg by the door. "I do not mind." She poured 2 cups and brought one to him, then settled into one of the chairs at the table. He sat across from her, cradling the hot cup in his work-roughened hands. "This is good coffee," he said after taking a sip. "My mother taught me the trick. A pinch of salt cuts the bitterness." Rebecca wrapped her hands around her own cup, and in the lamplight, Calvin could see the exhaustion in her face more clearly. But there was also relief there, a loosening of the tension she had carried since stepping off that stagecoach. "You have questions," she said quietly. "I can see them. You are wondering what kind of woman travels across the territory with 3 children and no husband, what kind of woman deceives a potential employer about her circumstances." Calvin considered this. "I reckon you did what you had to do to protect your children. I cannot fault a mother for that." Rebecca's eyes shimmered and she blinked rapidly. "We had nowhere else to go. My husband's family wanted nothing to do with us after he died. My own parents are long gone. I answered every respectable advertisement I could find, but when I mentioned the children, I received no responses. So I thought perhaps if I could just get here, if I could show you that we would be an asset and not a burden, perhaps you would give us a chance. You took quite a gamble. I could have sent you back on that stage. I know." She met his eyes. "But I had to try. My children deserve a home, stability, a chance at a decent life. I will work my fingers to the bone to give them that." The children emerged then, scrubbed and dressed in nightclothes. Rebecca stood immediately, ushering them toward their rooms. "Say good night to Mr. Fletcher," she instructed. "Good night, sir," they chorused, and then Rebecca disappeared into the rooms with them. Calvin could hear her low voice reading to them, the rhythm of some familiar story. He sat alone in the main room, drinking his coffee, and tried to remember the last time his house had felt like a home. The first week passed in a blur of activity. True to her word, Rebecca proved to be an exceptional housekeeper. She rose before dawn each day, had coffee and breakfast ready when Calvin came in from the morning chores. She scrubbed and cleaned, organized and sorted. The house had never been so orderly, so welcoming. The children fell into routines as well. Emma helped with all the household tasks, proving herself skilled at mending and cooking just as Rebecca had promised. Thomas followed Calvin around whenever the boy was not needed for other chores, eager to learn about the animals and the ranch work. He was quick and clever, remembering instructions the first time and executing them carefully. Sarah helped where she could, gathering eggs from the chickens and pulling weeds in the garden, though mostly she stayed close to her mother. Calvin found himself adjusting to the constant presence of others more easily than he had expected. He had thought the noise and activity would drive him to distraction. But instead, he discovered he liked coming in from the fields to find the smell of bread baking, liked sitting down to meals that were more than cold beans and stale biscuits, liked the sound of Rebecca's voice as she sang while she worked. He tried not to notice other things, the way the morning sun caught the auburn highlights in her hair, the grace of her movements as she went about her tasks, the sound of her laugh when Sarah said something unexpectedly funny, the intelligence in her eyes when they discussed household matters or when she asked him questions about the ranch. She was an employee, he reminded himself, a widowed mother with 3 children who depended on her. The last thing she needed was her employer making unwelcome advances. The last thing he needed was the complication of romantic feelings. But by the end of that first week, as they sat together after the children had gone to bed, sharing coffee and conversation in the lamplight, Calvin had to admit to himself that Rebecca Winters was the most interesting woman he had met in all his 32 years. One evening, as Rebecca mended one of his shirts by the firelight, she looked up at him thoughtfully. "May I ask you something personal, Calvin?" He set down the piece of harness he was repairing. "I suppose. Why did you place that advertisement? Why did you want a housekeeper?" Calvin was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share. "I inherited this ranch when my father died 3 years ago. He and I worked it together after my mother passed. After he was gone, I found I could manage the outdoor work well enough, but the house fell into neglect. I got tired of living in squalor, tired of eating poorly, figured I could afford to hire help. But you waited 3 years." "I did." He met her eyes. "I suppose I had to get lonely enough first, had to admit that maybe I did not want to spend the rest of my life alone after all." Understanding flickered across Rebecca's face. "I know something about loneliness. Even in a house full of children, it is possible to feel profoundly alone." "Was your husband a good man?" Rebecca's hand stilled on the mending. "He was a complicated man. He could be kind and generous, but he was also reckless with money and prone to schemes that never panned out. I loved him once, truly loved him. But by the end, I think we were more like strangers sharing a house. His death left me grief-stricken, but not in the way I expected. I grieved more for what we never had than for what we lost." The honesty in her words struck Calvin deeply. "I am sorry for that. Do not be. I have my children and they are worth any hardship. And now we have this chance, this new beginning. I am grateful for that, Calvin. More grateful than I can express. You have earned your place here, Rebecca. All of you have. I want you to know that." Her smile was warm and genuine, and Calvin felt his heart skip in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. As September gave way to October, the rhythm of life on the ranch settled into comfortable patterns. Calvin taught Thomas how to saddle a horse, how to mend a fence, how to read the weather in the sky. The boy soaked up knowledge like a sponge, his serious face lighting up with pride when Calvin praised his work. Emma proved invaluable to her mother, but Calvin noticed she was also quietly brilliant. She could calculate figures in her head faster than he could with pencil and paper. One evening, when he was working on the ranch accounts, she shyly asked if she might look at the ledger. "My father taught me bookkeeping," she explained. "I helped him with the boarding house accounts." Calvin handed over the ledger, curious. Within minutes, Emma had identified an error in his calculations and suggested a more efficient way of organizing his records. "You have a head for numbers," he told her, impressed. Emma blushed with pleasure. "I like how numbers always make sense. They are reliable in a way that people sometimes are not." The wisdom in her young voice made Calvin's chest ache. These children had learned hard lessons too early. Sarah, meanwhile, had begun following Calvin around almost as much as Thomas did. She chattered to him about her doll, about the chickens, about the clouds in the sky. At first, Calvin had not known what to do with such a small, talkative child, but he found himself growing fond of her innocent observations and endless questions. One afternoon, Sarah tugged on his sleeve and asked, "Mr. Calvin, do you think my papa can see me from heaven?" Calvin knelt down so he was at her eye level. The question deserved respect, not a pat answer. "I believe he can. And I believe he would be very proud of what a good, helpful girl you are." Sarah considered this seriously. "Mama cries sometimes at night when she thinks we are sleeping. I think she misses him." "That is natural. Your mother loved your father. It is right to cry for those we have lost." "Do you cry for your mama and papa?" Calvin felt his throat tighten. "Sometimes I do." Sarah nodded solemnly, then threw her small arms around his neck in an unexpected hug before running off to chase a butterfly. Calvin stood slowly, aware that his eyes were burning. These children were finding their way into his heart, and he was powerless to stop it. The truth was, he did not want to stop it, but it was Rebecca who occupied his thoughts most often. He found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to talk with her. He admired the way she handled challenges with quiet determination, the way she was endlessly patient with her children, the way she hummed while she worked, the way her whole face lit up when she smiled. He was falling in love with her, and that realization both exhilarated and frightened him. One Saturday evening, Calvin announced that he needed to go into Bannack the next day for supplies. "Anyone who wants to come along is welcome. We will make a day of it." The children's excitement was immediate and vocal. Rebecca quieted them gently. "If Mr. Calvin is kind enough to include us, we should accept graciously, not with squealing." "Thank you for the invitation," Emma said properly, though her eyes still danced with excitement. "Yes, thank you, sir," Thomas added. Sarah simply beamed at him. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, perfect autumn weather. They loaded into the wagon, the children chattering happily in the back. Rebecca sat beside Calvin on the seat, wearing her best dress, which was still worn but clean and carefully mended. "You did not have to include us," she said quietly as they set off. "I am sure you would have preferred to conduct your business without children underfoot." "I wanted you to come," Calvin replied honestly. "All of you. You have been working hard. You deserve an outing." In town, Calvin conducted his business at the general store while Rebecca took the children to look in shop windows. He bought the supplies he needed, and on impulse, added peppermint sticks for the children and a length of pretty calico fabric he thought would suit Rebecca's coloring. When they met back at the wagon, he distributed the peppermint sticks to delighted exclamations from the children. "You did not need to do that," Rebecca protested, though her eyes were soft. "I wanted to." He handed her the wrapped fabric. "I thought you might make something for yourself. You work hard, you should have something nice." Rebecca's fingers trembled as she touched the fabric. "Calvin, this is too much. This is not part of my wages. It is a gift. You are allowed to accept gifts, are you not?" Her eyes met his and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had yet spoken aloud. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will treasure it." They ate lunch at the small restaurant in town, a rare treat. Calvin watched Rebecca savor each bite, watched her make sure her children had full stomachs before finishing her own plate. When Sarah spilled her milk, Rebecca cleaned it up calmly while the little girl's eyes filled with tears. "Accidents happen," Rebecca soothed. "No harm done." The waitress, a woman named Martha whom Calvin had known for years, came over to refill their coffee. "So this is your new housekeeper," she said with undisguised curiosity. The whole town has been talking about how you took in a widow and her 3 children. Mrs. Winters is an excellent housekeeper, Calvin said evenly. I am fortunate to have found her. I am sure you are. Martha's tone suggested she thought there was more to the story than simple housekeeping. Well, welcome to Bannack, Mrs. Winters. I hope you and your children will be happy here. Thank you, Rebecca replied with quiet dignity. Everyone has been very kind. As they drove back to the ranch that afternoon, the children drowsy in the back of the wagon, Rebecca said softly, People will talk, you know. A single man and a widow living under the same roof. Let them talk. We know the truth of the situation. Yes, Rebecca agreed, but I would not want your reputation damaged because of me. Calvin glanced at her. My reputation can withstand a bit of gossip. Can yours? I have weathered worse than gossip. But there was a tightness around her mouth that told Calvin the thought bothered her more than she admitted. That night, after the children were asleep, Calvin and Rebecca sat by the fire as had become their custom. The October night was cool enough to justify a fire, and the dancing flames cast warm light across the room. Rebecca, Calvin began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. She looked up from her sewing, waiting patiently. I want you to know that you and the children are welcome here for as long as you wish to stay. This is not just about the housekeeping arrangement anymore. This is your home if you want it to be. Rebecca set down her sewing carefully. Calvin, what are you saying? He took a deep breath. I am saying that these past weeks have been the best I have known in years. I wake up happy. I look forward to coming in from the fields. I find myself thinking about what I might say to make you smile. The children have brought life to this place, and you have brought something I did not even know I was missing. Calvin. His name was barely a whisper on her lips. I am not asking for anything, he continued quickly. I know it is too soon, that you are still grieving your husband, that you may not feel that way about me. I just wanted you to know that you matter to me. All of you matter to me. Rebecca stood, and for a moment Calvin thought she might retreat to her room. Instead, she crossed to where he sat and took his hands in hers. I am not grieving my husband, she said softly. Not anymore. Perhaps I should be, perhaps there is something wrong with me that I am not. But the truth is, Calvin, I feel more alive now than I have in years. You have given us more than a home. You have given us kindness and respect and a second chance. You treat my children with affection and patience. You treat me like a person of worth, not just a servant or a burden. How could I not come to care for you? Calvin's heart hammered in his chest. Are you saying what I hope you are saying? I am saying that if you were to court me properly, I would welcome your attentions. Even with 3 children and all the complications that brings, Rebecca smiled, and it transformed her face. Especially with 3 children and all the complications. They are part of me, Calvin. You cannot have one without the others. I would not want to. He stood, still holding her hands, acutely aware of how close she was, how the firelight played across her features. Rebecca Winters, may I have permission to court you? Yes, Calvin Fletcher, you may. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it with an intensity that surprised him, but he simply squeezed her hands gently and released them. Then I will court you properly with all the respect you deserve. Rebecca's eyes sparkled with amusement and something warmer. I look forward to it. The courtship that followed was conducted with propriety, but it was no less meaningful for that. Calvin found small ways to show Rebecca his regard. He fixed the window in her makeshift bedroom that let in drafts. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow. He carved a set of wooden animals for Sarah, a beautiful bookmark for Emma, and a pocketknife for Thomas. Rebecca made him a new shirt from the calico fabric, though he protested he had meant it for her. I will make myself a dress with what is left, she assured him. But I wanted you to have something from my hands, something made with care. When he put on the shirt, it fit perfectly, and he wore it every Sunday, pride swelling in his chest. They talked for hours in the evenings, learning each other's histories, hopes, and dreams. Calvin told her about his childhood on the ranch, about his parents' loving marriage, about his loneliness after they were gone. Rebecca shared stories of her early life in Ohio, her marriage at 18 to a man who promised her the world but delivered hardship, her fierce love for her children and determination to give them better. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known," Calvin told her one evening. "I am just a mother doing what mothers do," Rebecca replied, but she blushed with pleasure. "You are more than that. You are remarkable." As October turned to November, the first snow fell, dusting the mountains white. Calvin began teaching Thomas to hunt, taking the boy out to track deer in the early mornings. Thomas proved to be a natural, moving quietly through the woods and reading the signs with an intuition that surprised Calvin. "My father used to take me hunting," Thomas confided one morning as they crouched behind a fallen log, watching a small herd of deer graze in a clearing. "Before he got sick, I thought I would never do this again." "You have a gift for it," Calvin said quietly. "You would make a fine rancher someday, if that is what you wanted." Thomas looked at him with shining eyes. "You really think so?" "I know so." They brought down a deer that morning, and Thomas beamed with pride as he helped Calvin Field dress it. That night, the family feasted on fresh venison, and Rebecca's eyes met Calvin's across the table with such warmth that he felt it in his bones. After dinner, as Rebecca cleaned up and the children played a quiet game of checkers that Calvin had produced from storage, Emma approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Calvin, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Emma." The girl twisted her hands together, uncharacteristically nervous. "Are you going to marry our mother?" Calvin glanced toward the kitchen, where Rebecca was elbow-deep in dishwater, then back at Emma's serious face. "Would that trouble you if I did?" "No, sir. I think it would be wonderful. Mama is happy here, happier than I have seen her in a long time. Thomas and Sarah love it here too. I was just wondering if perhaps you might make it permanent." The hope in her voice touched Calvin deeply. "I intend to ask your mother to marry me, Emma, but I wanted to wait a respectful amount of time to do things properly. Your father has not been gone even a year yet." Emma nodded slowly. "My father was not a bad man, but he was not always a good husband. He loved us in his way, but he was careless with our security. You are different. You are steady and kind. I think Mama knows that. I do not think she would judge you harshly for asking, even if society might. You are very wise for 10 years old." Emma's smile was fleeting but genuine. "I have had to grow up faster than most. But here, with you, I feel like perhaps I can be a child again sometimes. That is a gift, Mr. Calvin. I hope you know that. It is a gift to me as well, having you all here." November brought colder weather and shorter days. Calvin showed Thomas and Emma how to care for the animals in winter, how to break ice on water troughs, how to make sure the barn was properly insulated against the cold. Rebecca spent her days cooking hearty meals, preserving the last of the garden harvest, and preparing the house for the hard winter ahead. One evening, as a blizzard howled outside, they all huddled near the fire. The children were drowsy, warm, and safe. Rebecca sat close to Calvin, closer than was strictly proper, and he could smell the lavender soap she used. "I never imagined I could feel this content," she murmured, so quietly that only he could hear. "Nor I." Calvin covered her hand with his, a bold gesture, but she did not pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers through his. Thomas, half asleep against his mother's other side, murmured, "This is the best home we ever had." "Yes, it is," Rebecca agreed, her voice thick with emotion. Calvin looked around at the 4 people who had transformed his lonely house into a true home, and he knew he could not wait any longer. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed. Calvin rose early and rode into Bannack through snow that came up to his horse's knees in places. At the general store, he purchased a simple gold band, the finest piece of jewelry the store had in stock. When he returned to the ranch, he found Rebecca in the kitchen, kneading bread dough. The children were in the main room, working on their lessons. Rebecca had been teaching them reading and arithmetic every day, determined they would not fall behind in their education. "Rebecca, could you step outside with me for a moment?" She wiped her floury hands on her apron, giving him a curious look. "Is something wrong?" "No, I just need to speak with you privately." They stepped out onto the porch. The air was crisp and cold, their breath misting in front of them. The mountains gleamed white in the distance, and the world felt new and clean. "I know it has only been 2 months," Calvin began, his heart pounding. "I know society would say we should wait longer. But Rebecca, I have lived alone long enough to know my own mind, and I know that I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your intelligence. I love the way you sing while you work and the way you tuck Sarah's hair behind her ear. I love how fiercely you protect your children and how patiently you listen when Thomas tells you every detail about the horses. I love you, Rebecca, and I love Emma and Thomas and Sarah as well. I want to make this permanent. I want to give you all my name and my protection and everything I have to offer." He dropped to one knee in the snow, pulling out the ring. "Rebecca Winters, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Rebecca's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Calvin, yes, yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, and for a long moment they just held each other in the cold, bright morning. "I love you too," Rebecca whispered against his chest. "I have been afraid to say it, afraid to feel it so soon, but I cannot deny it anymore. I love you, Calvin Fletcher." He tilted her face up and kissed her, a gentle, reverent kiss that held all the promise of the future they would build together. The door burst open and the children tumbled out, clearly having been watching through the window. "Are you getting married?" Sarah shrieked with delight. Calvin and Rebecca broke apart laughing. "Yes, sweetheart," Rebecca said, reaching for her daughter, "if it is all right with you." "I think it is wonderful," Sarah declared. "Does this mean Mr. Calvin will be our papa?" Calvin looked at Thomas and Emma, searching their faces for any sign of distress or disapproval. Instead, he saw matching expressions of joy. "If you will have me as such," Calvin said carefully. "I know I cannot replace your father and I would never try. But I would be honored to be a father to you in whatever way feels right." Thomas stepped forward and offered his hand man to man. "I would like that very much, sir." Calvin shook his hand solemnly, then pulled the boy into a hug. Emma followed, and then Sarah, until all 5 of them stood in a tangle of arms and tears and laughter on the porch. "When will the wedding be?" Emma asked practically when they finally separated. Calvin and Rebecca looked at each other. "What do you think?" he asked her. "I am willing to wait if you want a proper engagement period." Rebecca shook her head. "I do not need a long engagement, I know my heart, but perhaps after Christmas. That gives us time to prepare, to let the children get used to the idea." "After Christmas, then?" Calvin smiled. "That gives me something to look forward to." The weeks leading up to Christmas were filled with preparation and happiness. Calvin took the wagon into Bannack and spoke with Reverend Harrison about performing the ceremony. He also stopped at the general store and, with Emma's help via a carefully written list, purchased fabric for new dresses for Rebecca and the girls, warm winter coats for all of them, and toys for the children's Christmas gifts. Rebecca threw herself into preparing for the wedding and the holiday with equal enthusiasm. She sewed her wedding dress from the fabric Calvin provided, a simple but elegant design in deep blue that brought out her eyes. Emma and Sarah would have matching dresses in lighter blue. Thomas helped Calvin build furniture for the new family arrangement. They constructed a proper bed frame for the settee so Rebecca would have a real bed after the wedding. They also built a beautiful cedar chest for her belongings. One afternoon, while working in the barn, Thomas said hesitantly, "Sir, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "And Thomas, you do not need to call me sir anymore. Calvin is fine. Or if you prefer, you could call me Pa, whatever feels right to you." Thomas ducked his head, but Calvin could see he was pleased. "Pa, then, I wanted to ask about the ranch, about the future." "What about it? Will it be mine someday? And Emma's and Sarah's? I do not mean to be greedy, but I want to know if this is truly our home, if we belong here permanently." Calvin set down the hammer he had been holding and gave Thomas his full attention. "This ranch will belong to all of you someday. I intend to add your names to the deed after the wedding, make it legal and binding. You are my family now, Thomas. This is your inheritance as much as any biological children your mother and I might have. You mean you would share equally, even if you have sons of your own, especially then. You are my children, all three of you. That is not going to change." Thomas's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Thank you, Pa. That means more than you know." Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and clear skies. Calvin had cut a small pine tree and brought it inside, and the children decorated it with strings of popcorn and cranberries. Paper ornaments Emma had carefully crafted, and candles that they would light only on Christmas morning under careful supervision. They sang carols around the fire, Rebecca's clear voice leading them through hymns and traditional songs. Calvin contributed his rough bass, and the children sang with enthusiasm if not perfect pitch. Sarah fell asleep in Calvin's lap, her rag doll clutched in her arms, and he marveled at how natural it felt to hold her. How right. On Christmas morning, the children woke to find gifts waiting beneath the tree. Sarah squealed over her new doll, far finer than her old rag one. Thomas received his first real hunting rifle, appropriately sized for a boy his age, and practically vibrated with excitement. Emma unwrapped a beautiful leather-bound journal and a set of fine pencils for her writings and calculations, and her eyes filled with tears of joy. "You noticed," she whispered to Calvin. "You noticed I like to write. Of course I noticed. You are important to me, Emma. Everything about you is important." Rebecca opened her gift from Calvin to find a beautiful cameo brooch that had belonged to his mother. "Calvin, this is too precious. I cannot accept your mother's jewelry." "My mother would have loved you," Calvin said firmly. "She would have wanted you to have it. Please, Rebecca, it would honor her memory." Rebecca pinned the brooch to her dress with trembling fingers, then presented Calvin with his gift, a beautifully tooled leather belt with his initials worked into the design. "I made it from scraps I found in the barn," she explained. "I worked on it in the evenings after you went to bed." "It is not much," but Calvin silenced her with a kiss, heedless of the children watching. "It is perfect. You are perfect." The wedding took place 2 days after Christmas in the small church in Bannack. The entire town turned out, curious to witness the marriage of the reclusive rancher to his housekeeper. If there were whispers about the speed of the courtship or the impropriety of the living arrangements that had preceded it, they were lost in the general atmosphere of goodwill. Rebecca wore her blue dress and the cameo brooch, her hair arranged simply but elegantly. Emma and Sarah stood beside her as attendants, looking like angels in their matching dresses. Thomas stood with Calvin, grave and proud in his new suit. Reverend Harrison performed the ceremony, and when Calvin slipped the ring onto Rebecca's finger and pledged to love and cherish her for all his days, His voice rang clear and certain through the small church. Rebecca's response was equally firm, her green eyes locked on his as she promised to love, honor, and cherish him in return. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Harrison announced with a smile. Calvin did so, thoroughly and tenderly, and the congregation erupted in applause. At the celebration afterward at the town hall, neighbors who had been strangers brought food and congratulations. Mrs. Henderson, who had watched their arrival with such skepticism, presented Rebecca with a beautiful quilt she had made. "Welcome to Bannack, Mrs. Fletcher," she said warmly. "I hope you and your family will be very happy here." "Thank you," Rebecca replied, genuinely moved. "You have all been so kind." Sam Cooper from the livery clapped Calvin on the shoulder. "You are a lucky man, Cal. That is a fine family you have got yourself." "I know it," Calvin agreed, watching Rebecca laugh at something Emma had said. "Luckiest man alive." They returned to the ranch as the sun set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. The children, exhausted from the excitement, tumbled into bed with minimal protest. For the first time, Rebecca did not settle onto her settee by the fire. Instead, she took Calvin's hand and let him lead her to what was now their shared bedroom. Calvin closed the door gently behind them, suddenly nervous. "I want you to know, there is no pressure. We can take this as slowly as you need." Rebecca reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "Calvin Fletcher, I am your wife now. I am not fragile or frightened. I am simply grateful." She kissed him, and it was different from the chaste kisses they had shared before. This was a kiss of promise and passion, of trust and desire. Calvin wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back, pouring all his love and devotion into the embrace. That night, they came together as husband and wife, and it was tender and sweet, and everything Calvin had hoped for. Afterward, Rebecca lay curled against his chest, her hair spilling across his shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy," she murmured sleepily. "After my first husband died, I thought the best I could hope for was survival, but you have given me so much more than that. You have given me joy." Calvin pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You have given me the same, Rebecca. Before you came, I was just existing. Now I am living." The winter passed in quiet contentment. Calvin and Rebecca fell into the rhythms of married life, learning each other's habits and preferences, building a partnership based on mutual respect and affection. The children thrived, growing stronger and more confident with each passing week. In February, Rebecca announced she was pregnant. The news was met with excitement from the children and quiet joy from Calvin. "You are happy?" Rebecca asked that night as they lay in bed. "I know we have not been married long, and with 3 children already, I am thrilled," Calvin assured her. "A child born of our love, a brother or sister for Emma, Thomas, and Sarah. How could I be anything but happy?" Emma proved to be excited about the prospect of a new baby, immediately taking charge of preparations. She helped Rebecca sew tiny clothes and organize the small room that would serve as a nursery. Thomas announced that he would teach the baby everything about ranching as soon as it was old enough. Sarah talked endlessly about all the things she would show her new brother or sister. Spring came to Montana Territory, transforming the landscape from white to green. Calves were born, and Thomas helped Calvin with the branding. Emma kept meticulous records of the new stock in the ledger. Sarah helped her mother plant the garden, chattering about the baby while she pressed seeds into the warm earth. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rebecca said thoughtfully, "I have been thinking about expanding the ranch." Calvin looked at her with interest. "What do you have in mind?" "We have good land here, but we are not using all of it. What if we increased the herd, and perhaps we could start raising horses as well as cattle? Thomas has a natural way with them." That would require significant investment, Calvin pointed out, though he was intrigued by the idea. Emma and I have been going over the accounts. We have enough saved to make a start, and I brought some money from the sale of my late husband's boarding house effects. Not much, but enough to help. Calvin took her hand. You would invest your money in the ranch. It is our ranch now, Calvin, our future, our children's future. Of course I would invest in it. They talked late into the evening, making plans and dreaming aloud. By the time they went to bed, they had decided to expand the herd and purchase breeding stock for horses. Thomas, when informed the next morning, looked like he might burst with pride. Summer brought long days of hard work. Calvin hired 2 temporary hands to help with the expansion, and the ranch buzzed with activity. Rebecca, growing round with the baby, managed the household and the accounts with equal efficiency. Emma helped with both, proving herself invaluable. In August, Rebecca went into labor early one morning. Calvin sent Thomas racing into town for the doctor while he tried to keep his panic under control. Emma took charge of Sarah, keeping her young sister occupied and calm. The labor was long but uncomplicated. As the sun set, Rebecca delivered a healthy baby boy with strong lungs and a cap of dark hair. Calvin held his son for the first time and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "He is perfect," he whispered, watching the baby's tiny fingers curl around his thumb. "What should we name him?" Rebecca asked, exhausted but radiant. Calvin had given this thought. "I would like to call him James, after my father. James Thomas Fletcher, if that suits you. Thomas for the boy who has become like a son to me." Thomas, allowed into the room to meet his new brother, looked stunned and honored. "You would name him after me. You are family," Calvin said simply. "It seems right." Emma and Sarah crowded around to see the baby, cooing over their tiny brother. Sarah pronounced him very small but very nice, which made everyone laugh. Life settled into new rhythms with the baby. James proved to be a relatively easy infant, and the whole family doted on him. Thomas was remarkably gentle with his baby brother, carrying him around and singing to him in a surprisingly good singing voice. Emma helped with feedings and changings without complaint. Sarah appointed herself James's official entertainer, performing elaborate dances and songs for his benefit. As autumn painted the mountains gold and red, Calvin reflected on how much his life had changed in just over a year. He had gone from a lonely man rattling around an empty house to the husband of a woman he loved deeply, and the father of 4 children who filled his days with purpose and his heart with joy. One evening, as they prepared for bed, Rebecca came to him with a serious expression. "Calvin, I need to tell you something." His heart jumped with concern. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "No, nothing like that." She took his hands. "I am pregnant again." Calvin stared at her. "But James is barely 3 months old." "I know. The doctor says it happens sometimes, especially when a woman is nursing. It is not ideal timing, but the baby will come, and we will love it just as we love the others." Calvin pulled her into his arms. "We will indeed. Though perhaps we should consider building an addition onto the house if our family keeps growing at this rate." Rebecca laughed against his chest. "That might be wise." They did build that addition the following spring, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. By the time their daughter Elizabeth was born in late June, the house was ready. Elizabeth arrived during a thunderstorm, her cries competing with the thunder. She had Rebecca's auburn hair and Calvin's brown eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she had a personality that could not be ignored. "She is going to keep us on our toes," the doctor predicted, handing the squalling infant to her mother. He was right. Elizabeth was curious and active, reaching her milestones early and getting into everything. But she was also sweet-natured and affectionate, quick to give hugs and kisses. The children adapted to another sibling with ease. Emma, now 12, was old enough to be a genuine help with the babies. Thomas, at 10, divided his time between helping Calvin with the ranch and assisting his mother in the house. Sarah, at 7, attended the new school that had opened in Bannack and came home each day full of stories about her teacher and classmates. 3 years passed in a blur of activity and growth. The ranch prospered. Calvin's decision to expand into horse breeding proved wise, and the Fletcher Ranch became known throughout Montana Territory for producing quality stock. Emma kept the books with professional precision, and Calvin joked that she was the real brains of the operation. Thomas grew tall and strong, a young man now at 13 who could work alongside Calvin as an equal partner. He had a gift for training horses that drew buyers from as far as Helena. Emma, at 15, was a stunning young woman with her mother's beauty and a brilliant mind. She had begun corresponding with a women's college back east, dreaming of higher education. Calvin encouraged her, determined that she would have every opportunity. Sarah, at 10, was the family storyteller, weaving elaborate tales for her younger siblings and writing them down in the journal Calvin had given her for her birthday. She talked about becoming a writer someday, and Calvin did not doubt she would succeed. James, at 3, was a sturdy boy who followed Thomas everywhere, mimicking his older brother's every move. Elizabeth, at 2, toddled after Sarah, demanding to be included in everything. And Rebecca, at 31, had grown even more beautiful in Calvin's eyes. Motherhood suited her, and so did the security and love of their marriage. The shadows that had haunted her eyes when she first arrived in Bannack were long gone, replaced by contentment and joy. One evening, as they sat on the expanded porch watching the children play in the yard, Rebecca leaned against Calvin's shoulder with a sigh of satisfaction. "You ever think about that day I arrived with 3 children and nowhere else to go?" she asked. "I think about it often," Calvin admitted. "I think about how close I came to turning you away, how different my life would be if I had. You gave us everything, Calvin. A home, a family, a future. You loved my children as your own from the beginning. I will never be able to repay that gift." Calvin turned to face her, taking her hands. "Rebecca, you have given me just as much. You took a lonely, bitter man and taught him how to live again. You filled my house with laughter and love. You gave me children and a family. We have built something beautiful together, something lasting. There is no debt between us, only love." Rebecca's eyes filled with happy tears. "I love you, Calvin Fletcher, more than I ever thought it possible to love anyone. And I love you, Rebecca Fletcher. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, their children's laughter providing a joyful soundtrack to the moment. More years passed, bringing changes and growth. Emma did go to that women's college, returning home with a degree in mathematics, and a quiet young man named Peter whom she married at 20. They settled on land adjacent to the Fletcher Ranch, and Peter proved to be a capable farmer and a kind husband. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations as Calvin aged, eventually becoming a full partner in the business. At 21, he married a sweet-natured girl from town named Lucy, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch property. Sarah pursued her dream of writing, publishing her first story in a magazine when she was 19. She married a newspaper editor named David and moved to Helena, though she visited often and filled her stories with loving descriptions of ranch life. James and Elizabeth grew up surrounded by love and security, never knowing the hardship their older siblings had endured in their early years. James became a veterinarian, the first in the family to pursue a profession beyond ranching. Elizabeth married a lawyer and became a fierce advocate for women's rights, making her mother and father proud with her passion and intelligence. Through it all, Calvin and Rebecca remained at the center of the family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house rang with voices and laughter, 3 generations coming together to honor the love that had started it all. That night, as Calvin and Rebecca prepared for bed, exhausted but happy, Rebecca smiled at her reflection in the mirror. 25 years, she marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stepped off that stage coach with 3 frightened children, and no idea what the future held. Calvin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. They looked at their reflection together, 2 people who had weathered storms and celebrated joys, who had built a life and a legacy together. "I knew the moment I saw you," Calvin said softly. "Something in my heart recognized something in yours. I did not know what it meant then, but I do now. You were my destiny, Rebecca. You and those 3 children were exactly what I needed, exactly what I had been waiting for without knowing it." Rebecca turned in his arms, her eyes bright with love. "And you were ours, our salvation, our home, our everything. I thank God every day that you did not send us away, that you gave us a chance." "Best decision I ever made," Calvin said, and kissed her. Outside their window, the Montana night was quiet and peaceful. The ranch that had once been a lonely outpost was now the thriving heart of a large and loving family. The house that had echoed with emptiness now overflowed with memories and warmth. Calvin and Rebecca climbed into bed, fitting together as naturally as they had that first night 25 years ago. In the darkness, holding hands beneath the quilts Rebecca had sewn, they drifted off to sleep. The years continued their steady march. Calvin and Rebecca grew older, their hair turning silver, their steps slowing. But their love never diminished. They spent their days in comfortable companionship, working side by side in the garden, playing with their grandchildren, watching the sunset from the porch they had shared for so many years. When Calvin was 68 and Rebecca 67, he fell ill during a particularly harsh winter. The doctor was frank. His heart was failing, worn out from years of hard work and long life. Calvin accepted this news with equanimity. He had lived a full, rich life, loved deeply and been loved in return. He had no regrets. On a clear February morning, surrounded by his wife and all their children, Calvin Fletcher passed peacefully from this world. His last words were for Rebecca. "Wait for me. I will find you again." Rebecca held his hand as he slipped away, her tears falling silently. The loss was profound, a wound that cut to her very soul, but she did not shatter. Calvin had given her strength enough to endure even this. She lived another 8 years, remaining active in the ranch operations and spending as much time as possible with her children and grandchildren. She told them stories of their grandfather, of the day she had arrived with 3 children and nowhere else to go, of the man who had given them everything. When Rebecca finally passed in her sleep at 75, her children found her with a peaceful smile on her face, and Calvin's last letter to her clutched in her hand. The letter, written during one of his trips to sell horses in Helena, spoke of his love for her, his gratitude for the life they had built, his certainty that they would be together always. They buried Rebecca beside Calvin on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land and the family they had created together. The headstone reads simply, "Calvin and Rebecca Fletcher, together always." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down through children and grandchildren, a testament to the love and hard work of the couple who had started it all. And every year, on the anniversary of Calvin and Rebecca's wedding, the family gathered to celebrate their legacy, to remember the lonely cowboy who had hired a housekeeper and found instead his soulmate, and the brave woman who had arrived with 3 children and nowhere else to go and found a home beyond her wildest dreams. Their story became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story of courage and hope, of taking chances and choosing love. It was a story of a family built not just on blood but on choice, on the decision to open hearts and homes to those in need. And it was a story with the happiest of endings, because Calvin and Rebecca's love created ripples that extended far beyond their own lives, touching everyone who came after, proving that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most beautiful destinations. In the town of Bannack, Montana Territory, now Montana State, people still remembered the Fletchers. The ranch they built still stood, prosperous and thriving. The family they created still flourished, generation after generation carrying forward the values Calvin and Rebecca had instilled: hard work, kindness, integrity, and above all, love. It was a legacy that would endure, a testament to 2 people who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had built something lasting from desperate circumstances, who had proven that love, real and true and steadfast, could overcome any obstacle and create miracles from the most ordinary of beginnings. Their love story, born in the Wild West of 1877, lived on forever in the hearts of those who came after. A reminder that home is not a place but a person, that family is built on love, not blood, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of faith.